around the world, and thank you for joining us once again on truth2u.org. That's truth number 2 letter u.org. It's season 2 of Torah Pearls. I'm Jono, and joining me in the virtual Truth to You studio all the way from Ireland is Jason of Spiritualbabies.net. G'day, mate.
How's it going? We are starting the book of Numbers. How cool is that?
We're in the book, but even before we get there, last week's Torah portion. Now there were 2, and you and I did Bechukotai, and we walked away from that scratching our heads a little bit, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. We were actually quite confident and happy until we got to the last part, which totally kicked us in the butt.
It really, really did. And that was chapter 27, verse, if I remember correctly, I think it was verse 29 and on, which said, no person under the ban who may become doomed to destruction among men shall be redeemed, but shall surely be put to death. And we just weren't happy with our conclusions. I think we what did we speculate in regards to Yiftah's daughter? We speculated in regards to, say, Agag when Samuel hacked him to pieces and things like that. But it was Mitch, who incidentally is going on the tour with his lovely wife. Mitch Orlovsky came to the rescue. And he said, I want to try to clear up something in the parasha. He said, you can point to someone and say, I want to give his value to the temple, depending on age, etc. That value is set and have to be redeemed. However, if I point to a man and it turns out that he was sentenced to death by a court, his value cannot be redeemed because a dead man has no value. Now, you also spoke to Rabbi Joshua Neely about this. Does that concur with what he was saying?
It kind of does, only from a different perspective. So you might have a person, right, who's been caught doing something really bad and is going to get stoned. And so he thinks to himself, you know what, I'll dedicate myself to the temple, I'll dedicate myself to the priests, then I'll work for them for the rest of my life, and I'll kind of get off, right? I'm going to become a special offering, and you offer your value to the... But it says that if you do that, if you're already doomed, then you can't do that. No amount of money can buy you back from justice.
It's not going to give you a get-out-of-jail-free card. So that's kind of along the same lines.
Yeah.
Thank you to Rabbi Joshua Neely. Thank you to Mitch. Looking forward to seeing you, Mitch, and your lovely wife on the tour in November when we go to Israel. And there are still, 6 seats left, I think? I think there's 6 seats left on the bus, people. So if you would like to come with us, we would love to have you. And you can find details on truth2u.org. Just follow the links. Joining us from Indonesia is the author of Let's Get Biblical. Why Doesn't Judaism Accept the Christian Messiah, Volumes 1 and 2. You can get a copy from his website, outreachjudaism.org. That's outreachjudaism.org. Welcome back to the program, Rabbi Tovia Singer.
It's a pleasure to be here with me.
Isn't it always?
It's a big joy, big privilege for someone like you to have me on.
Well, it would have been a great privilege too last week, but you were gallivanting around the jungles of who knows where. Actually, you were in a conference, weren't you? And it went very well. Just quickly give us the details on that.
If I explain, well, we had a room filled with people who came from different faiths, many of them of Jewish descent. Some of them were not sure about their descent. And we spent 2 days from morning till evening, and I'll be releasing the videos of these seminars. And so I'm very grateful to all the students I had. They asked the most brilliant questions, and it gave me the opportunity to engage. And I don't think a single person who was there will ever be the same. Many of them repented and came to accept the God of Israel and the yoke of heaven and fell in love with Hashem in a brand new way. And I'm just very grateful to them that I can be a part of that. Yeah.
What a wonderful thing. So there's going to be footage of that coming up on Facebook very soon, on YouTube. Look forward to seeing that, and a special shout out to everybody listening in Indonesia. I know there's a lot of you guys, so welcome and thank you for listening. So, and before we continue in Bamidbar, if I may, I'd like to kick off by reading from, going way back into the beginning of Exodus, because from verse 7 of chapter 1, it does say, but the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly, multiplied and grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. And there arose a new king over Egypt who didn't know Joseph, and he said to the people, look, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and it happen in the event of war that they join our enemies and fight against us. And so go up out of the land. Therefore they set taskmasters over them, and so on and so forth. It says in verse 12, but the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew, is what it says. Now we find ourselves in the book of Bamidbar, Numbers in the English. And it's called Numbers because of the incredible amount of math, but also the amazing amount of people that we have in the tribes of Israel. And it's been a controversial topic, hasn't it? It's not everybody accepts these numbers, Tobia.
Well, here's we have a limited amount of time, so I want to just highlight one anomaly here, and if you want to discuss another, it's fine. The tribe of Levi, as it turns out, were not involved in the slavery itself. Moses was in the house of Pharaoh, and the tribe of Levi was not enslaved in Egypt. We talked about this before. What is very striking is the size of the tribe of Levi. That's what I'd like you to focus on. What you'll notice is that the size of Judah, these are tribes with vast numbers. Why do they have such fantastic growth, going from 70 people and in 210 years to have millions of people? We're only counting here only for the 12 tribes. We're counting here only those of military age from 20 to 60. There's going to be another count for Levi separately, but we're going to see that Yehuda is huge in size. Levi was not enslaved in Egypt. As such, they were not given the blessing of having this tremendous amount of children. And we see the result in the disparity of the count that we're going to find here in the book of Numbers. Levi is going to be tiny in size because they didn't have the blessing of multiple children. They didn't need it.
So the total, and the total besides Levi is 603,550. And that is a men of fighting age? Is that what it was? 20 years and older.
Yes.
And it does seem like an incredibly huge, possibly some say inflated figure. What you're referring to, Levi had a total. I'm just flicking forward now. A total of 22,000 that were 1 month old and above.
Right. So we're talking about means it's only a guess of how many Jews there were total outside of Levi. But you can easily 2-3 million if you have if you have 20 to 60 that are 603,550. How many women were there? How many people younger than 20? How many people older than 60? The numbers are astounding. It would be 2-3 million. Levi is unique because Levi is given a special blessing that tribe alone is counted from 1 month, no matter how old they were. There's actually two countings of Levi, because one is how many of them can actually work in the sanctuary. But Levi is given, because of a series of events, they were given the blessing that was originally given to the firstborn. We covered that in the previous show. So Levi is an exceedingly tiny tribe, very, very small. And because they didn't enjoy the blessing of multiple children, of these fantastically exploding families. So therefore, they had a normal growth, and their normal growth would produce a much more moderate normative number here in the book of Numbers.
And when you say exploding, when we go to verse 43, now these verses in between we have to focus on. We're finding ourselves in Numbers chapter 3 here, but in verse 43 it says, all the firstborn males, according to the number of names from a month old and above, and this is of the whole of Israel, were numbered 22,273. Now that's 273 more than the males of the tribe of Levi. But what that does mean is that now these are the firstborn. So what that does mean is that the mothers of the other tribes had an enormous amount of children, right?
Which is exactly commensurate with the blessing. It matches perfectly. And notice the Torah doesn't point it out. That means we're able to put these together. You know, the Torah is not there's no point trying to be made here of what I've just said. That means we can go back, walk this backwards, and figure it out. But you notice the Torah is not in any way trying to make a point of this. You see, the tribes that given blessing. We see it very clearly that there was something miraculous going on, and we see that the Torah is not trying to make a deal of this here because it is not relevant here. We just know it. We could see it. It is obvious that the disparity in number is staggering, and therefore we could see that the tribe of Levi was not given the blessing of miraculous great growth of families.
Mm-hmm. Jason, we just jumped over 3 chapters. What would you like to highlight, my friend? Anything in chapter 1? Let's just quickly go through there. Now, we are dealing with a whole lot of numbers. People can read all of this, but let's highlight things that need to be highlighted. What stands out for you?
There's just a couple of things. It's worth noting, first of all, that polls, you might find that in your text, POLLS. In the UK a few years ago, Margaret Thatcher famously passed a bill for a poll tax. Then she retired, and she passed this big bag of poop over to a guy called John Major, whose first job was to instigate this poll tax. And there were riots and arrests, and everyone hated it. But in this sense, it literally means skull or head money. So when you do a head count.
Oh, right, that's a head count. Okay.
Right. So when we read polls, it's literally a head count, and that's referring to how much money times that by the amount of heads. What also is interesting here is that it says take ye the sum of all the congregation of the children of Israel, but it says by their families, by their fathers' houses, according to the number of names every male. So I want to ask Tovia, is that 2 different counts? Is that the addition of 2 different counts? Or are they breaking it down?
So the word su'u doesn't really mean count. It's the word su'u, it means to raise up. Su'u Yisrosh means kol adas b'nei Yisrael. This lens fits very well into coming out of the trauma of Leviticus 26 again. Su'u means raise up the head, meaning raise someone's face up, of the whole children of Israel. That means each of you really do count. But su'u means to raise up. Therefore, if someone's head is down, only then could it be raised up. The word mispar means a number. It's a different word completely. And then we have another word that's used, pekudei, which really means... It means to also another number for counting. But just like in the English language, the word count has 2 meanings. Meaning, a count means you can count numerically, but the word count in English has a second meaning, and that is you really count. That's very similar to what's going on here in this text, and that is that you really count is happening here. Let's raise up your head. You really are a part of the nation. Each one of you has access to Torah, which is given in Sinai. There isn't an accident that God said to Moses in the desert of Sinai, why is this Midbar here where this important count is taking place? Why there's so many counts happening? There's going to actually be 3 different countings of the Jewish people in the wilderness. We've been counted one. There's going to be one more at the end of their trek. Actually, the Jewish people throughout Tanakh are counted 9 times. God is counting them constantly, but it's
now what. While you mentioned that, though, Tovia, there was one incident where that was executed by David, for which he got into a lot of trouble.
Yeah, and that you'll find in 1 Chronicles 21 or in 2 Samuel 24. He got in trouble, but really the Jews did, because we see that God had seduced David to count them in an incorrect fashion. It wasn't the census itself that was the problem. It was the method used to take the census.
Right.
That means that that's what was wrong. The census was a good thing. The problem was that he took a census in a way, he used a method that would cause a plague. And that's that was the result. And the consequences just shatters us all when we read these passages. So it was a methodology. It wasn't the census itself. Mm-hmm. Just a point, the passage of Bamidbar opens up it's called, to the Jews, it's generally called the book of Bamidbar, which means in the wilderness. The term numbers actually comes from the Vulgate. It comes from the Latin, calling it numbers. And the word is the essential feature of this book is wilderness. This is happening in the wilderness. And the question is, why the emphasis on the wilderness? It seems, again, completely vestigial. Now, our sages give us two understandings which are critical. Number one, Bamidbar in a wilderness is a place where is accessible to anyone. That means a desert is a place that is no man's land. Anybody can have access to it. Anyone can go there. No one can really own wilderness because it's untamable. You can't survive there. So number one, Torah is accessible to anyone. And it is true that it may require a scholar to understand Daniel 7. You need to have a lot of information from Zechariah to really assemble it together, or else it's going to be difficult to understand. But one of the beautiful things is that when I taught my children Genesis, even as little kids, as 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds, and you tell them the story of Abraham, and you tell them the story of what occurred to Noah, they get it on a very profound level. The Torah is accessible to anyone. The other part of our sages tell us something very strange, and that is that just like a midbar is a place that no one can own, no one can tame, it's a place that's hefker. Hefker means it has no ownership, that it's free of anything. So a person has to, in order to study Torah, has to be free of everything, has to make himself like a wilderness. What does that mean? What it means is that very often people approach the Bible and want to use it as a tool to prove what they already believe. They come with a belief system that they like, that they crave, that they cherish. They believe this and that. And then they come to the Bible trying to find any verse, any passage to sustain and bolster what they already believe. That is not a correct approach to Scripture. Within what they're doing essentially is they're using the Bible as not to find truth, but to support something they already believe. They're not coming saying, look, I'm willing to accept wherever this Bible takes me. Now, if you come with the doctrine of the Trinity, you already believe it, and say, well, can I find a verse that could be construed to support you could do that, but then you are not really receiving the Torah. You have to approach the Torah as a wilderness. That means you yourself have to surrender completely and say, you know what? I'm willing to accept wherever this Torah gets me, and I'm not going to try to prove that the outcome of a conference in Nicaea convened by Constantine is going to guide me in how I'm going to learn Scripture. I have to say, you know what? It's open. I am emptying myself, flushing out my preconceived notions, and I'm going to be a servant and follow the Bible with coming as my mind is like a wilderness. It's open to accept the Torah in how it's presented to me.
Beautiful. Jason.
Firstly, to kind of piggyback where Tovi was going, because it echoes a little bit my point here, it's interesting that we have this massive group of people that have been pulled out of Egypt, out of even though they were indentured and they were working, they did have a permanent residence. They had food. They had some security of, their life was their loins, if you like, were going to be prolonged because of Egypt wanted to keep this workforce, and they were taken out into the desert. And then we've got this kind of ragtag band of different ages and different abilities and different nations, and some of them were fit for work, some of them were unfit for work, some of them were kids, some of them were old, they were cripples. God organizes them, and he gives everyone a place and everyone a purpose, and turns this mix into something that's organized. And we often get this idea that God's a bit more chaos. He's Big Bang. He's there's not much order to it. He's everything at once, and so it's a bit of a mix. And we can't really put him in a box. But we see through this whole Torah portion, God organizing people, making them into
arrangements,
right, and He turns them into a valid unit, into a fighting unit, into a social unit. Everyone has a place, everyone has a part to play, and I think that's worth mentioning that for many of us that come from a different tradition that weren't brought up Jewish or weren't brought up with this kind of monotheistic look at the Tanakh as the source of our relationship. We too have to come out of a place where we are comfortable, and that might not be a perfect place for us. We might live, because my tradition certainly instilled quite a lot of fear to keep you where they wanted you, and you take that fear because you're comfortable, and you can go along to your church every Sunday and have a decent time and feel good about yourself when you leave. You've done your bit for the week, and now you're done. But you do have to leave that security. You have to go out into the wilderness and strip off all of that protection, strip off that safe place, and as Toby said, start from a zero foundation. So that's the first thing. The second thing is really easy, and I'm going to give you an opportunity to skip some passages here, because the next few verses, the next dozen or so verses, are names. And it's really awesome for you to sit down and do word studies. So we're not going to do that for you because that would be a shame.
For a number of hours.
Right,
but
yeah.
Yes.
But they're beautiful. And the Hebrew names, they all have a meaning. Some of them have more than one meaning, depending on who you ask. But it's a really awesome study. I went through them last night and I got a lot from them. I've had a few private messages. Your name shouldn't be Jason, it's Greek. You need to get a Hebrew name. And while I have no intention of getting a Hebrew name, certainly not yet, I'm kind of curious about what I might go for if I do change. And there are some
I'm going to make a suggestion. My favorite in this whole passage is Mushi. Chapter 3, verse 20. If you're going to have a Hebrew name, it should be Mushi. Tovia, can I get a second opinion on that?
I was thinking, what?
Mushi!
Mushi? That's good. That works.
What is it in Hebrew? No, chapter 3, verse 20. What?
Wait, let me just open up chapter 3. I was looking
3,
at a different passage as you were doing that. Chapter 3, verse 20. Okay, let's go there. So
I want everyone to have a look, and if Jason should change his name.
Ubnei, 1 second here. Ubnei Meroli Lemishbechoisam Machli Umushi. Yes.
Mushi!
Yes.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Excellent name.
So,
if Jason changes his name to a Hebrew name, I vote it should be Mushi. Now,
just one other point because this is essential, is just to erase, help with a little confusion. We're reading the Bible, now reading Numbers chapter 1, but we have the advantage that we actually read the whole Torah, or we're familiar with many events in the Torah. You might wonder to yourself, well, why are they creating an army? Who are they fighting? As it turns out, they're not going to fight anybody. Why is there such an interest in a military, means organizing a army, of a count of an army? Who are they fighting? Who are these people fighting? Well, remember, this is just to train you how to think. Numbers chapter 13 and 14 hadn't happened yet, which means the story of the spies, which we're going to come to later on, where at the aftermath, this generation cannot enter the land of Israel, and therefore only the descendants could enter the land of Israel. That hasn't happened yet. Therefore, had the event of the spies gone in a different direction, it would be this generation that would have entered the land of Israel and gone to war with the inhabitants in the land of Israel. So remember, we don't have yet chapter 13 and 14 of Numbers yet.
Now, speaking of the military, Tovia, we find that in this Torah portion, the Levites are excused from serving in the military, and they are charged specifically with basically carrying the furnishings and the everything in regards to the tabernacle, right?
Yeah, I mean, and look, incidentally, yes, that's correct, that the Levites are very small. The Torah says Achas Mate Levi, as it turns out, the tribe of Levi, Loisivkoid Es Rosham, you do not count their heads, Loisisa, and don't raise them up. It's that same language, but very different. B'seich b'nei Yisrael. Now look at verse 50. Va'ata, however, you, hafked es halavim. Now, what's very strange here is the word there is the exact same word tifkod, hafked, but it has a totally different meaning. There's something fantastic going on here, and it's saying, but you appoint. So the word, we see there with your own eyes that the word count in 49, just take my word if you don't have the Hebrew for it, it says loy sifkoid es rosham, don't count their names. Now go to verse 50. Va'ata, however, you hafked es halavim. It's the exact same root. It's the exact same word. It's pei kuf dalid is the root. So there you see the exact same word has a different meaning completely. Hafked means really doesn't mean to count, but it means to appoint. It means to be given a special role, and that's what every person who is in the count is given. You are assigned or appointed a special role. So ata hafked es halavim, you should in fact appoint the Levium. What is their role? Their role is to specifically serve in the tabernacle. Now look at the next words. Hema Yisu es hamishkan. They will Yisu carry the Mishkan. Well, Yisu is the exact same word of the word count again. That these are not just accidents here. So what's happening is don't put them in the census in the way that first census, but in fact because they have a different kind of pakad, a different kind of counting number, namely an appointing. You don't raise their heads because their job is to raise the tabernacle as they carry it with all of its kalim. So if you don't have the Hebrew going on, so much is stripped out of the text, and you see this going just 49 and 50, you see the exact same words used interchangeably of counting and of appointing, of taking a census and of raising up. It's exquisite.
Let me ask you something, because the math here is just a little bit, it's interesting. And this goes back to where you began in Numbers chapter 3. I'll just read it. It says, all who were numbered of the Levites, whom Moses and Aaron numbered at the commandments of the Lord by their families, all the males from a month old and above, were 22,000. Then the Lord said to Moses, number all the firstborn males of the children of Israel from a month old and above, and take a number of their names, and you shall take for the Levites for me, I am the Lord, instead of all the firstborn among the children of Israel, and the livestock of the Levites instead of the firstborn among the livestock of the children of Israel. So Moses numbered all the firstborn among the children of Israel as the Lord commanded him, and all the firstborn males according to the number of the names from a month old and above of those who were numbered from them were 22,273. Now that's 273 more than the Levites that were counted. And what we find here, it says, then the Lord spoke to Moses saying, take the Levites instead of all the firstborn among the children of Israel, and the livestock of the Levites instead of their livestock. The Levites shall be mine. I am the Lord. And for the redemption of the 273 of all the firstborn of the children of Israel, who are more than the number of the Levites, you shall take 5 shekels. For each one individually, you shall take them in the currency of the shekel of the sanctuary, the shekel of 20 gerahs. And you shall give the money which with which the excess number of them is redeemed to Aaron and his sons. So Moses took the redemption money. We have redemption money of those who were over and above, those who were redeemed by the Levites from the firstborn of the children of Israel. He took the money, 1,365 shekels. Now it's 5 times 273, and there it is. And Moses gave the redemption money to Aaron and his sons. Tovia.
Yeah, so what you have is that the Levites were completely separate. Obviously, you have there the larger count is the count of those who were the firstborn were included in it.
Okay, and so it turns out that the firstborn outweigh the Levites by 273. There's not enough Levites to redeem the firstborn. Therefore, those that are counted over are redeemed by 5 silver shekels, right?
Yeah.
And I just jump in, and it's worth mentioning that because if we go back over the last 2 Torah portions and we have a look at the number of the shekel for each person at the different stages through their lives, there's no amount for a baby under 30 days old. Right. And that's why they give you a specific amount in this, because you couldn't look back. You couldn't look it up. It doesn't exist.
It would be so completely not germane to this Torah portion, but there are actually many, many laws regarding a baby who's less than 30. Their lives are in such extraordinary jeopardy. Will they make it to 30 days? Once the baby was 30 days old, so then it was considered to have a smachta and a presumption that it was going to survive and live and grow up and so on. Therefore, they could be counted. There are many, many other laws, but it's not germane to this this thing.
So one other thing that I find curious, moving on in chapter 4, the Lord spoke to Moses.
Chapter 4? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are we going too far?
No, go ahead. I know
so it says,
they're going to cut off your electricity, so that's good.
Take a census of the sons of Korah from among the children of Levi, by the families, by their father's house, from 30 years old and above. Now, this is an anomaly, right? I mean, 30 years... That's
not an anomaly. That means when a person... The Torah recognizes, and it's in fact in Jewish law, that let's say when a boy becomes 13 or a girl becomes 12, so they become responsible for many laws, but not all laws. Because we're taught by our sages that, in fact, a person is still developing. They don't have the full understanding of consequences of what they do. For example, if a person's 13 years old, so they're responsible to a regular court, but not from heaven. We know this today, that we can now call this. We can look at the Torah and now say, wow, we actually know from the science of neurology that the frontal lobe is not developed fully until a person's really an adult, and it's not developed as a teenager. And teenagers tend to get themselves in an enormous amount of trouble because they don't fully grasp the consequences of their behavior. The Talmud discusses this extensively, and therefore it's actually just like I know folks who work in air control. They work in that you can't really work on your own in air traffic control until you've stood behind someone else for I think 5 years. You have to assist them until you can actually give them that kind of responsibility. Mm-hmm. A person could not work in the most sensitive areas of the temple, and we're going to see the consequences. The consequences are staggering if they even look. Even the children of Korah, who are the Kahas, who are given the most responsibility. There's a warning here. If they dare look at the Ark of the Covenant in the wrong way, they can die. So therefore, it's not just enough for them. It's not like you take a 15-year-old and give them that kind of responsibility. If someone, for example, lifts the Ark of the Covenant not by the poles, they'll die immediately. It's like touching the third rail of a train. So, and therefore, we are told here, be very, very careful, and therefore someone who's completely mature from 30 years old, there's a very specific time, and also not too old. You know that a person, when they're a pilot flying a plane with 600, 500 people aboard, an A380, they have to retire when they're 65, no matter how good they are, no matter how proficient they are. It's such a delicate operation that a person has to know with great precision exactly what to do, what they may not do. They have to be at the peak of their physical and mental strength, and that's the reason.
Right.
That's why they're given this very narrow aperture because the Torah is going to outline. Now, I just want to point out something that we kind of went over very quickly, and that is we see that the Torah does mention again here when talking about the children of Levi, discussing the children of Aaron, that there's again a mention that Aaron's oldest children died. We kind of skipped over that. Why does it bring it up? Like, why do you keep bringing up that they died? It was a tragedy. And remember what we said in Achrei Mos? I said that they died without having children. We actually see that here. It actually said they died without children. And remember what I said to you? The Torah, I said there's two kinds of doctors. One doctor says, don't do something, right? And the other doctor says, don't do it. And by the way, there's this fellow who lives down the block from you. You remember Henry? He actually did that, and he's dead. So which doctor, which advice are you likely to listen to more carefully? Obviously, the doctor who gives you an example of someone who didn't listen to the advice, and in fact they were dead as a result. So we've just passed that, and so the context is important. The Torah is warning you. We're going back to another program we've done together, and that is you're building a house for God, a tabernacle or a temple. You are the laws that govern these holy houses, which you're building for God, are not governed by the laws of thermodynamics. They're not governed by Newton's laws of gravity and so on and so forth. They have a whole different series of laws which you cannot apprehend, and they will follow these laws very carefully, because if you don't, the consequences could be staggering. So the tribe of Levi is counted differently in a whole variety of ways. But we also have two counts for them, because Levi, in order to do the most sensitive work here, and we're told very clearly that you can die if you do this improperly. It's like a pilot. You can't fly a 747. Even if you come out, they first give you an Embraer Air little plane, and then you can graduate to the 747s, the 777. So what's happening is, if you're going to handle the most sensitive work that's brought into view, that we're introduced to in this portion, you've got to be at the absolute peak of your mental and physical maturity.
Now, the verse that you just were alluding to, that's chapter 3, verse 4. Nadab and Abihu had died before the Lord when they offered profane fire before the Lord in the wilderness of Sinai, and they had no children. So Eleazar and Itamar ministered as priests in the presence of Aaron, their father. Now, if I'm not mistaken, I think, Tovia, you're a descendant of Itamar. Is that correct?
Yeah. I have that's my genealogical line, and tragically, Nadab and Abihu had no children. I mentioned that when the Torah says the double language, it says after the death of Aaron's children, and they died. Whenever you have that, there's nothing vestigial in the Bible. If you notice, you see how tight I'm going to use the word stingy, the Torah is with words. That back then I told you as a commentary on Parshas Achrei Mos, that the double language is that they not only died, but they died childless. It was a double death. It was very, very tragic. Here you see a later chapter that actually now can comment, and it reflects exactly what I told you. I can go on here because there's a lot of extraneous language in chapter 3. If you want me to do it, I will.
Please. Sure.
All right, so if you look at the language here, first of all, chapter 3, verse 1, Eila told us Aaron and Moshe. These are the generations of the children of Aaron and Moshe. B'yom diber Hashem el Moshe b'Har Sinai, on the day that God spoke to Moses at Mount Sinai. And then it actually doesn't give us the children of Moses. It actually only mentions the children of Aaron. That's what's a really strange anomaly. So what's happening over here? And then if you notice, there's also like this strange redundancy. Well, you already, these are the names of the children of Aaron. Well, do we really need that? Could you just like skip that and look at verse 3? Same thing. These are the children. Like, I could have cut that all out. If I was an English teacher and you said, if you handed me an essay, okay, and I'm an English teacher, I'm going to take my red pencil and just be crossing all that out. I'm going to be putting a big question mark. What are you telling me?
So that's not going, what you're saying is that's not going towards the word count, right?
Yeah, that means what is going on here? Now, another question is, the very big question is, why is it saying that these are the sons of Aaron and Moses? I put a big question mark here if I was your teacher scoring this text and going, you never actually tell me the children of Moses here. It's not here. Like, so why is Moses introduced here? So this is very deep, very heavy, but it's important that the people understand this. And that is, and what does it say on the day that God gave the Torah? Then they were the children on that day when God gave the Torah at Mount Sinai. As it turns out, Nadav and Avihu were people who were very, very great. And they sought to be like Moses. They wanted to and volunteered to move into the holy place, but they did it very quickly without the proper information. In Leviticus 16, we're told later, this is how you have to enter the Holy of Holies. This is the kind of smoke you need to introduce in, and this smoke or cloud that you bring in using incense is going to meet the cloud that God brings in, and those two clouds have to touch. I encourage the listeners to dial back on that previous show to understand that. So the portion of Leviticus 16 starts off by saying that Nadav and after their death, and then it says, look, this is how not to die in the midst of all this. What really happened to Nadav and Avihu? How do they get into that kind of trouble? What happened? So our sages tell us that because Nadav and Avihu are called the children of Moses here, it teaches, so the Talmud says, it's very famous, that someone who teaches someone else Torah, they are accounted as though they're the parents. That a rebbe who teaches a disciple Torah, he is counted as though he is in fact a parent. What happened with these two young men is they really sought to be just like Moses. They saw Moses encountering God at the highest possible level, and they voluntarily jumped in to be close to their father. And unfortunately, they did it in a way that was impetuous, and it got them killed because they did not do it as ordained by God. It's very intriguing that this is introduced here, because there is a larger question: is if a person's teacher becomes like your father, well, wasn't Moses the teacher of all the Jewish people? Why is it these kids are identified uniquely as Moses' children? It means, if given what the Talmud tells us, that a child a student is like a child, why is Nadav and Avihu only Moses' children? The whole Jewish people are. What Nadav and Avihu really sought to do is to be like their master completely, voluntarily. And that was their great, and it ultimately for them, it got them in trouble. If you look at the name Nadav Avihu, we actually could see it in their name. The word Nadav has an actual meaning. The word Nadav means to volunteer. That's what the word Nadav means, to do something without being asked to do it. Va'avihu, which means and his father. So what we see here in the name, so what we can, from the structure of what's going on here, we see what actually occurred. Nadav and Avihu sought to be exactly like Moses. Uncles, the Bible, we're told that uncles are considered very beloved by children. Children love their uncle. In fact, so much so that the word for love, dod, anila dodi dodi li, the word for love is also the exact same word as an uncle. Dod is an uncle and dod is love. It's the exact same word. So what happened is they wanted to be exactly like their uncle, but they acted precipitously. They acted too quickly. And as a result, they were the children of Moses, but it got them in trouble because they did it voluntarily without thinking, precipitously, and it got them killed. So that's what we have in view here, but you need to parse out that passage very, very carefully.
Right. Mushy.
Oh man, I just wanted to mention that we were in Numbers 4. I don't know where we are now, but we were in Numbers 4:3, and there's a really interesting use of a word here that says, from 30 years old and up until they're 50, they shall enter the service. But the service, if you took a literal translation of that, it's actually warfare. And I find it interesting that the non-Levites, the non-Levites are organized into an army, and those that can't fight do behind that front line. And we also have here an army, if you like, that's working like a special elite force. So it's a terrible analogy, But in Star Wars, Darth Vader had his regular stormtroopers, but he also had these really cool Imperial guards, the red guys that stood outside with their big
the red
spears.
guys.
Right. So the Levites, I like to think of the red guys.
Those guys when you wanted to go and buy the little action figures.
No, they were really hard to find.
They were really hard to find. If you've got one of those at home, boy, they must be worth a mint.
Yeah, if you've got one, send it to me. I've always wanted to have one.
Done.
But so I like to see them as the red guys, and it's kind of interesting that he has this personal group of people that go into this warfare. Now, I don't think warfare is we look at that like they're soldiers, but I think if we strip away the combat element of that and retain the kind of orchestra of who's doing what, and the construction of service and the military precision, that makes more sense to me. And also, you have to ask the question, why Korah? We get 4 groups of Cohen mentioned in this passage. And it's Korah because it was family. I mean, it's family, it's like mafia. I can't make really bad analogies so far. The dark side of the Force and mafia, but it's the family link, and I think that's why Korah's punished so badly later on. Spoilers, but it's worth mentioning that's in the text, because I think when you read service, sometimes service, especially in a religious sense, seems a bit kind of weak and namby-pamby.
I'm infatuated with that now, because it says, okay, from 30 years old and above, even to 50 years old, all who enter as you say, the warfare to do the work of the tabernacle of meeting. Can you elaborate on that, Xavier?
Well, actually, Jason hit a very important point, and that's why we still keep him and we love him. It's actually, once again, he said something quite brilliant. I don't know how, but he did it. Anyway, I'm kidding. As it turns out, the word tzva really does mean an army, even in modern Hebrew. The Levites did play a very important role during a time of war, because as it turns out that when the Jewish people went to war, the Ark of the Covenant carried by the Levites went in front of the nation and protected them during a time of war. So they participated in the war by being the bearers of the Ark of the Covenant, and that would protect the nation of Israel, which now sheds light on a passage in Jeremiah. In Jeremiah 3, we are told that at the end of days, there'll be a time when no one's going to talk about the Ark of the Covenant. And you'll find that in verse 16. Well, what is Jeremiah talking about? Well, now we understand. In the Messianic age, there will not be war. And as such, no one's going to say, hey, get the Ark of the Covenant to go and fight. So actually, they were a part of the army, but they were a different kind of the army in that they weren't carrying a sword, or in our days an M16, but they were carrying the Ark of the Covenant. They did play that integral role during a time of milchama, during a time of war. At the end of days, there won't be war, there won't be a necessity for them to carry out this function as part of the army.
Okay, but okay. Now it says and you did mention this, verse 15. They shall come to carry them, but they shall not touch any holy thing, lest they die. That's reiterated right at the end of our Torah portion as well. It says, well, actually, let me read from 17. It says, the Lord spoke to Aaron and Moses, saying, "Do not cut off the tribe of the families of is it Korati?
Yes.
Okay, from among the Levites, but do this in regard to them, that they may live and not die when they approach the most holy things. Aaron and his son shall go in and appoint each of them to his service and to his task, but they shall not go in to watch while the holy things are being covered, lest they die."
Right. They can't look at it. When it seems to touch it, you have to remember that the Ark of the Covenant wasn't physically picked up, but there were poles that went through it. So they had to understand the laws of how to insert the poles, how to carry it, how not to look, to gaze upon it, lest they would, as it says in verse, al tachrisu, so they should not be cut off, so they should not be killed. So they knew exactly how to carry these things. 15-year-olds were not allowed to engage in this kind of practice. It was only people who were at the peak of their physical and intellectual requisite that were able to carry out these laws.
And that's right at the end of our Torah portion. And so I know we've jumped all over the place. Jason, is there anything else that you want to highlight before we close off?
Two things are both related. First of all, when we do get to the very end and it says these things are being covered, when I break down the words there, it's actually more about it being divided. So I think this is about when everything's being, rather than just kind of throwing a cover over a box and moving it, I think it's more about everything being dismantled and given its place. And yeah, covered, but it's more about the walls coming down and everything being put into its packaging, and it's like you're moving house, but you don't have a house. The whole house is going. And I think that's what it's referring to there. And I just want to know, the personal note, for the last few weeks, I've been volunteering at a Jewish museum here in Ireland. If you're visiting Ireland and you're interested in the Jewish history, come and say hello. It's a really cool place. But I get a kind of an idea of how this works. I mean, I'm a noob in this place, but I get access to things which visitors don't get access to. But there are some things which I don't have access to because I haven't been there long enough. I don't know how to treat some of the older documents. What should I wear? What environment should I open them in? Do I take them out and open them on the floor? Should it be in the office? Should it be, there's various different gloves.
You have to put on the special gloves.
Right, yeah, for different things, right? And I don't know that. I haven't been trained in that. That's not my thing. But I do get sometimes to open up the cabinets and to have a look at these artifacts that have been 200, 300 years old. And I kind of get that there's a different role for different people and different
accountability.
Right, different accountability. Yeah. So if I mess up because I touch something I shouldn't have, I'll mess up big time. But if I mess up touching something I'm allowed to touch, the punishment isn't so bad. I'll not that I'm going to get flogged. But I haven't overstepped my boundary. I've just made a simple mistake, and that's two different things. So I just thought that was a personal reflection on the text that I could see in my normal life.
Was there anything else, Toby, that you wanted to highlight?
It's very clear that the Torah God does not want the children of Israel to battle among themselves. Lahavdil, we see it with other religions, that they fight over different of their holy objects and who's in charge of what. And they have the church of the whatever in Jerusalem. They different Christian denominations, the priests fight with each other and kill each other over who
the church of the Holy Sepulchre.
Yeah. So what happens is actually the Israeli police are frequently called in to break up fistfights between the...
And they have a Muslim key.
Don't ask what's going on. But they've been killing each other because they want to open doors and close doors and so on.
Yeah.
So they want the iron hurrah, and sometimes an Ethiopian priest or a Coptic guy stays too long and he gets his head smashed in. The Torah it's obvious that if the Torah had not assigned specific tribes where you're going to stand next to which other tribe, you send to the north, the south, the east, and west, if it wasn't identified which family specifically got to carry the ark, which ones carry the oil, it would have created an enormous amount of problems, or people would have fought over these honors, who gets to do it. But you know what? Today, if you go into a synagogue, it is a big honor to be called up to the Torah to make the first blessing when they begin to read the portion. But no one argues, because we know that the first blessing is assigned to the Kohen, to the priest, no matter what. You could stand on your head, but we know that there are certain jobs, certain tests, sacred tests that were given. And the Torah says, look, only this family, only this group could carry out this task. This, as we see, will ensure that later on in the Bible, this is not going to be a problem. Which means that it was so patently obvious of who was assigned what job that, in fact, they didn't fight with each other. The children of Kohath had their own job, their own role. We'll even see in Ezekiel, in the end of the book of Ezekiel, that there were certain priestly families that were given special rights because they were faithful to Solomon and so on. The Torah wants to make sure that mistakes don't happen because people are overzealous and they want the honor. No. Each family is given. This one carries the oil, this one carries this, and therefore there should be no inner fighting amongst them who gets which honor, which carries what. And it worked out perfectly.
Beautiful. That is Bamidbar, the first portion of the book of Numbers. Mushi of spiritualbabies.net. Thank you, my friend. And Rabbi Tovia Singer of outreachjudaism.org. Outreachjudaism.org, where you can get a copy of Let's Get Biblical. Why Doesn't Judaism Accept the Christian Messiah? Volumes 1 and 2. I highly recommend it. And until next week, when we get into Nassau, be blessed and be set apart by the truth of our Father's Word. Shalom.
Oh man, I hope people don't start calling me Mushy.